radiation in the medical field is just it is such a major technology that we've gotten into. It is amazing how many lives have been saved from radiation.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. This episode, I'm going to try something new. It's actually a re-release of an earlier episode that was originally in two parts, released 2 years ago in October of 2020. In this episode, I will be interviewing DJ LeClear, otherwise known as the Rad Guy. DJ's got a really cool YouTube page where he does educational videos on nuclear energy and radiation effects. He's really knowledgeable. This interview took place before he had his characteristic handlebar mustache. So I urge you to go look at it on my YouTube page. If you're not aware of that, I will be releasing the video version of this interview as well. So I hope you enjoy my earlier recorded interview with DJ LeClear, the Rad Guy. DJ LeClear, welcome to The Rational View.
Well, thank you for having me.
So what was your career path and how did you become a radiation safety expert?
Well, it all started out when I was in the Navy in their nuclear program as an engineering laboratory technician doing radiological controls, steam plant chemistry, radiochemistry. And that was definitely the beginning of my interest in radiation and nuclear power as well, being an operator in their plants. And once I got out, definitely still had a major interest in it. So then I actually worked on analytical X-ray equipment for a while, which is definitely it's very radiation related, but I was doing a lot of other mechanical stuff, electronics stuff, still some more water flow and heat removal. But I eventually I finished while I was working my nuclear engineering technology degree, and definitely kept up my interest in nuclear. And eventually I started working as a nuclear engineer for the state of Wisconsin. And definitely it was interesting because I thought I knew a lot when I was in the Navy, getting out of the Navy and learning everything they taught me. And then I got into the kind of the real world of radiation and really just broadened my knowledge once I got out and realized I really didn't know as much as I thought I did. But definitely made me even more interested, I think, in radiation, broadening my knowledge on it. And so I eventually decided that I would get my master's in health physics.
Health physics.
Yep. And I have my health physics master's that I'm currently working on is at Illinois Institute of Technology, and it's specifically focused on emergency preparedness and radiological security, because that's kind of what I do right now with my current position. And I could explain what that all is if you want me to.
Well, let's just back up a second and maybe start a little more basic. Could you give our listeners maybe a brief intro into what is radiation and where it comes from?
Absolutely. So radiation, I mean, it comes in two different physical forms, really. So you got your radiation that's electromagnetic radiation, something I think we're all actually more familiar with than a lot of people think, and that's basically light. That light is radiation, and light is just a specific uh, energy of radiation, a specific wavelength. Lower energy, that's kind of your infrared, and then you have your microwaves and your uh, other things that use for cell phones and radio. Those are the less than or less energetic than the light you can see. And then you start getting just beyond that energy level that you can see, and you get into your ultraviolet radiation. And at the high end of the ultraviolet spectrum is when you start getting to that point where radiation has enough energy where it can start removing electrons from elements, and that's called ionizing radiation. So you go beyond that, and much higher energy. So you got your ultraviolet, your X-rays, gamma rays, and it just goes higher and higher energy. So that's the kind of that typically when people are talking about radiation, they're talking about that higher energy ionizing radiation when it comes to electromagnetic radiation. And then there's that other physical manifestation of radiation, and it's particle radiation. And that right there is you have beta particles, alpha particles, neutrons, protons. There's a lot of different particles out there. But basically, it's just matter with energy. And so your most basic one is kind of your beta particle. And that's it's exactly the same thing as an electron. It's just that electron's not bound to a nucleus or bound to an atom. So it has energy, and it can do similar things as your gamma or the electromagnetic radiation. So it can also ionize if it has enough energy. So, and then your alpha's a similar thing, just a lot heavier, a lot higher of a charge. So it's your alphas are able to strip electrons even more readily. But that's kind of very basic. What is radiation?
Okay. And where does it come from? I mean, it's not just from nuclear power plants, right? Obviously the sun is giving us light, but I mean,
Mhm.
radiation is natural. We're experiencing it all the
Yep.
time, right? What
Yes,
sources do
absolutely.
people encounter in their day-to-day?
We're surrounded by radiation. We live in a sea of radiation, and like every moment of your life, you have just hundreds and thousands of particles passing through you of radiation. And when you're talking about your natural sources of radiation that are ionizing specifically, the ones that we have are ones that come from space, basically, either coming from the sun or coming from outside of our solar system. Your cosmic radiation is what we call it. Those are going to be you have your gamma, your high energy electromagnetic radiation, as well as protons is actually a big one. Proton uh, radiation, and then that's a big part of it. But we're protected a lot from our atmosphere. So if you go beyond our atmosphere, your dose of radiation would go a lot higher. Um, and then other natural sources would be just from the ground. All around you, there are radionuclides. Those are specific elements that have a radioactive component to them. So they're unstable, and when they decay to a more stable form, they release radiation, both gamma and beta, alpha radiation, and that's going to be in a common one is your granite that has a lot of uranium in it.
Hmm.
And I think one thing that your viewers would be very familiar with is radon.
Right.
And radon actually comes from uranium, which is in granite. It's one of the daughter products of uranium, which means basically uranium, it'll release an alpha particle, will turn into another element, which will release another particle and turn into another element. And eventually you'll get to radon, which is a gas, right? And it can fill into your basements. So
Hmm.
that's another really common one. It just comes from the soil and all around us. Another big one is bananas. Those have potassium in it, and a percentage of that potassium is actually potassium 40, which is a radioactive um, version of potassium. And so every time you eat a banana, you get a dose of radiation. Um, Potatoes, that's another big one. A lot of
Okay.
potassium in those. Potato chips are actually some of the most radioactive things that we eat,
Uh-oh. I'm in
because they have a
trouble.
lot of potassium in them. Um, well, I mean, we'll definitely talk about that. It's definitely not something to be concerned about at
What
all when it comes to the amount of radiation you're getting from those sources.
One thing I read recently was that you get a lot of radiation from smoking tobacco. Apparently, the big leaves of
Yep.
the tobacco plants absorb the radon gas, and they kind of have like some hair on them, and the radon gas get trapped in these leaves, and then will
Hmm.
get rolled up into cigarettes.
Yep. Yep. I remember I tried looking into this as well, but one of the things they always taught us they taught me through my time in the Navy nuclear power program was that you got like 1 rem of dose per year for a heavy smoker or like fairly heavy smoker. And that's about 3 times what you would normally get from natural background
Okay.
sources just from smoking alone. So you would
Mm.
add 3 times as much more to it. But
Another thing that I know about from my background, at least, is from space.
Mhm,
You have the magnetic fields around the Earth protect the Earth, but there's a lot of radiation
mhm.
particles that circulate in these magnetic fields, and these are called the Van Allen belts. And if you go up in
Yep.
an airplane and you go up above most of the atmosphere, you're much less protected from the space radiation. You get cosmic rays coming into you, and you can get a significant dose
Hmm.
of radiation just in going on a transatlantic flight.
Yep. Oh yeah. Uh, I'm actually well known to pretty much every time I go fly, I bring a detector with me, and definitely it's a big conversation starter. I remember
Indeed.
one long flight that I had. I talked for 2 hours straight with the flight attendants. They actually invited me to the back, and we just had a real long conversation. It was awesome. But
Nice,
like,
nice.
yeah,
Yeah,
oh
and it's
yeah,
also one of the biggest risks of astronauts going to other planets or the moon is the
yeah.
space radiation dose that they can get is quite significant once you get outside the radiation belts.
Hmm. Hmm. So what's interesting in the program that I'm doing, space radiation is actually something that they're uh, looking to add, I believe, to the program as like a specialization track because that's a big field they need people uh, from health physics to get it into. So
So
um,
so that's good. Let's move on maybe, and if you could describe the risks of radiation exposure from health standpoint.
yeah, this is definitely a subject. It, it takes a lot of discussion, but I guess the big thing is in our normal lives, even though we do live in a sea of radiation, radiation really is the least of our concerns, um, especially when you're talking about all the other risks that we deal with in our normal um, or daily life, basically like risks of driving, risks of taking a shower. Like there's so many other things that we really need to worry about. That radiation, it sounds way scarier than it really is. And that's because radiation is a pretty weak carcinogen. I know that that might not mean too much, but basically, you have to have a lot of it for one thing, a large dose of it to even be able to get a measurable increase in your health risks. Um, they've seen this in epidemiological studies, basically, and you have to have a fairly high dose. Trying to think of how many times higher than background. Let's see. Well, it's significantly higher than background in order to actually have increase in health effects. But even if you did get to that point where you can measure it, it's still not a dramatic increase in your risks.
Mm.
There's a lot of other things that we deal with that do have a much higher risk that we really should be dealing with. But even that level that I mentioned that we have measurable evidence for risk, there's not that many cases where that happens, if that makes any sense.
Now, what you're saying,
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, but I've also heard it said, and a lot of the regulations that I see about safe doses are based on the fact that there's no safe dose of radiation. And people say that any radiation can cause cancer.
So that kind of goes into how we regulate when it comes to it's way simpler to basically take those risks that we've measured before at those high levels of radiation and extrapolate all the way down to zero. Basically, it makes it a lot simpler to do your regulation. Yeah, but the thing is, we don't have any evidence for it at those really low levels. We can measure a possible hypothetical risk, but and it's quite possible that that risk is even there, but it's so uh, small that it's negligible. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah. Basically,
I
it might be
understand
there.
extrapolating, like linear
Yeah.
extrapolation, and I've heard the
Hmm.
term linear no threshold being bandied about on the internet for describing the prediction of these low dose effects of
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
radiation exposure for cancer, for example.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of things that go on to your cells when it comes to, or when they receive a radiation dose that we've just learned in the last 20 or so years, like well, maybe a little more than that. 80s and 90s, we've learned so much and into this century. And we know that when you get down to really low doses, things do uh, change and how your body kind of responds to those lower doses. And honestly, it leaves a lot more questions than it answers when you start learning about these things. I could start getting into the very specifics, but it's really it's quite technical. But I always kind of ascribe to the fact that um, the risks are so low that um, it shouldn't be of a concern to us. I mean, there's a risk of oxygen. There's a risk of drinking water. There's risks to all sorts of things that
So all
are
these
actually
things,
necessary.
are things that can create mutations in your DNA that then can lead to cancer. Is that what you're describing?
Maybe not water, but oxygen can. Yes. Um, so the other things that we deal with in this a normal everyday uh, or in our normal everyday lives comes with cancer risk. Like not everything, but a lot of things that are good for your health uh, are carcinogenic. If especially if you have too much of it, and then you start seeing, like I said, those measurable increases of um, your risk. Alcohol is a big one, huge one actually. That's very carcinogenic, but we we drink that in excess, and with no worry. But
Yes, we do.
yes,
The one analogy I like to use is that radiation is the same as getting a sunburn. Effectively, it's
hmm hmm
basically the same effect and the same sort of mechanism for having the potential to get cancer. And people go out and sit in the sun all the time.
yep. And or not all the time, but you should get sun exposure, because of the health benefits that you're getting, from both being outside, and the vitamin D and everything. So we know that, we need it, and that not having it, um, is a health risk in itself. Um, but if it is carcinogenic in the exact same manner that, radiation is. In fact, because it's your, ultraviolet, not your infrared, your ultraviolet radiation, and it's using that same mechanism, on your cells, and, this exact same thing as getting radiation. And that's a big thing when I'm talking about risks is, right. Well, you do go outside, right, and you do expose yourself to the sun. You expose yourself to, ultraviolet radiation that's basically, causing the same effects as ionizing radiation, specifically to your skin. You're getting a dose. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, and you wouldn't purposely 100% avoid that. You would not want to.
In fact, I've also heard people arguing that some low doses of radiation are actually good for the body. There was an article where people were using
Mhm.
radiation of X-rays to mitigate pneumonia from COVID, for example. People are getting a chest X-ray, and it actually helped the body to recover from COVID.
Yeah. Radiation, in the medical field. Like you said, for that COVID, the COVID-19 treatment where it's a dose to the lungs. I mean, that's big. Like, you could actually save people's lives that way, and that's just the, uh, barely scratching the surface when it comes to, how much radiation is used, for cancer treatment, diagnosis. I mean, those are the two big ones. Your diagnosis is your cancer treatment. There are so many lives that are saved, due to radiation.
So
And we know. Yeah, go ahead.
how does the radiation help you? Because I thought radiation basically just kills cells.
It's so cool the things we can do. Like this excites me just talking about this, where we can develop these isotopes in nuclear reactors, and we can alter their chemistry, and, inject them, or have somebody ingest these radionuclides that has cancer. For example, this is just an example here, and that chemistry of it can make it to where it binds, to specifically where that cancer is, and kills the cancer. So you're right, it does kill, but it kills the cancer cells. And we've gotten so much better and better at it that we're able to, make it specifically target, where that cancer is located with a pretty heavy dose of radiation. Um, and that's a really major thing that they do, at, uh, medical facilities, when it comes to using, radiation in cancer treatment. Um, there's, another example that, I really love is you can use, proton therapy, where basically you take a stream of protons and you're directing it, at a person's, tumor, And what's really cool about proton therapy is we can make it to where the energy of those photons is deposited almost exclusively in the tumor, and you're not damaging. Well, you're damaging maybe a little bit, but not much at all. You're mostly damaging the tumor itself and killing those tumor cells. So that's a big area where radiation is used to save people's lives. And then also in diagnosis, and that's a big thing for saving people's lives as well.
Yeah, it's amazing and ironic. I mean, people think of it as a destructive force, but it really is being used for healing more than anything.
Hmm.
Now, I've heard of a term, the hormesis effect. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with that term?
Oh, yes, I am. um, Very controversial, as you probably already know. Um, and so I kind of alluded to it a little bit before when it comes to when we started doing more research into those lower doses of radiation and kind of the things that happen when you get to those lower doses to cells. Um, and there is absolutely evidence for hermetic effects at low doses when it comes to doing things in a lab, basically with cells and with mice or rats. I can't remember. Um, and but there's also some things that leave a little some questions. So it's hard to say that there would be a consensus on that, but there's definitely something there. I would not uh, hang my hat on it yet, uh, just because I'm still looking for more evidence on it.
Okay.
But we definitely know something at those lower levels. It's much. There's other things happening
It seems to
to
be
the point
stimulating
where
some healing in the body.
yes. So I'll get into it. Basically, uh, they know that um, you basically can kind of prime your cells to prepare it for a large dose of radiation by giving it a large dose of radiation kind of thing. Um, yeah, it's kind of
Okay.
interesting actually. Which possibly like maybe if we do a little more research into it, could be something for people who go to space, right? That they're about to get a fairly large dose of radiation. If you can basically prime their cells to be ready to get that dose by using radiation, that could be beneficial for uh, people, astronauts.
Yeah,
So,
the body seems to adapt to different levels of background radiation because obviously there, and this is something probably evolutionary because there's all sorts of different levels on Earth
hmm
depending on where you
hmm
live, and people can live in very high radiation areas with no bad effects if they've been there for a while.
yep. One big one that comes to mind is Ramsar, Iran, that has a large background radiation that you get from the Earth there, and I know it's a fairly small cohort or small group of people, so it's hard to make a lot of conclusions about it. Uh, but um, I know that there's definitely not negative effects from it. But I have heard from there and some other places where it's like, oh, maybe seems like maybe there's some benefit there. But
Hmm.
it's such small sample sizes. It's hard to uh, again, like I said, like hang my hat on that. But um, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
So, shifting gears a little bit and going more towards the nuclear power question. Over the years, how many people would you say have been killed from radiation sickness due to nuclear accidents?
So due to radiation sickness from nuclear accidents.
Yeah, like acute,
Um, yep.
and also
So,
from cancer as well.
yep, perfect. Okay, so the only one when it comes to nuclear power plants that resulted in people dying from radiation is Chernobyl. I know that actually some people think Fukushima there was one, but that honestly that was just a legal thing that if you know a lot about radiation, like no, that guy. It was very very unlikely that that guy died from radiation, but Chernobyl, basically, that's your one that you look at for people who have actually died from radiation due to nuclear power plant accidents, and it was 28 people. I hope I'm not wrong here. I get people that 28 people died from radiation sickness. There's two or three people that died in the blast. Don't quote me on that exactly, but I know one person died right away. But anyways, so about 28 people from acute radiation sickness. And when it comes to your cancer from afterwards, um, they have followed this cohort, this large group of people for the past, how many years has it been? 30, 40, a lot of years. And they noticed an increase in your thyroid cancer from people who were mostly children at the time of the incident, and uh, there the increase resulted in the median result that they got from that was about 15 people that uh, died from uh, cancer due or caused by the Chernobyl incident, and then you can do a plus or minus an amount. It could be down to, I think the number I saw was 7, and then up to I can't remember the exact number, but it was less than 100, much significantly less than 100. But the median number was 15. So you'll hear a lot of people they'll say 15, but really it's kind of a range.
I see.
So basically, so far with the evidence that we have, that we've been able to observe from epidemiological studies, uh, due to Chernobyl, is less than 100 so far, or
So
around 100.
how certain are we that this isn't some great big Russian cover-up? A lot of people will
Yeah,
say, "Oh no, it's been much worse, and this is just Soviet propaganda."
hmm that's. I get a little. I shouldn't get peeved, but I do get a little peeved when I hear that. It's a little bit of a misunderstanding. It is not Russia that did all of this, that came up with these numbers. This is the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. It's a large group of different organizations, um, and it is an international uh, effort to basically follow these people and do the epidemiological studies. Certainly, Russia is involved in helping out here in Ukraine, Belarus, um, but this is an international effort. It would have to be a extreme cover up, uh, like people who would say that climate change isn't real. Like that would be a huge cover up, right? So there's too many people involved here for this to be a cover up, really. It's not just the Russian government said this is how many people died. That's not how it is.
Okay, so these people had access to the site and were able to make measurements, and
Yes.
you're telling me that there's no way that this could have been faked, basically. The data that they have is good data. You can believe in it.
Yes, I would. It would be quite unlikely. The organizations who do this are the organizations we go to. Uh, all health physicists pretty much go to when they're trying to look up health effects. The United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSCEAR, is the acronym that we use for that. But basically, they're like the uh, place we go to for consensus on health effects of radiation. It would be extremely unlikely that there's a cover up there.
So what you're telling me is that over the history of nuclear power, on the order of 100 people or less have died from nuclear radiation accidents.
Yes. And it's unbelievable. Or I think a lot of people are flabbergasted when they hear that. They're really like, what?
It's definitely not the perception of a lot of people, I think. I think
Mm-hmm.
the perception of risk and damage is much different. I mean, putting this into perspective, it's nothing, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's negligible.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. I mean, how big was the town of Chernobyl? It was like, what, 16,000 people or something like that when it was
That
evacuated?
does sound about right.
So
Yeah.
less than 100 deaths, 16,000 people evacuated. I mean, it doesn't even compare to, the sort of evacuations that were done for hydroelectric dams, for example, which most people
Mm-hmm.
don't blink an eye out. The Three Gorges Dam in China had 1.2 million people were displaced. And,
Yep.
100 people died building the dam, and it only makes 5 times more power than Chernobyl.
Yep. Yes. Uh, uh, and what's the name of the Chinese dam where when it broke? Yeah, it was 1 to 200,000 people died. Like, boom, gone. Like no one talks about that. No one makes a mini series on that. Because
Yeah.
it's not. People don't see it as like super scary. It's just water, making energy. But
And this is the heart of the
um,
problem for people that are pro-nuclear. I mean, society's building new gas plants every day with the knowledge that the air pollution they generate will kill 300 times more people per kilowatt hour
mhm,
than nuclear.
mhm.
And we don't require gas plants to encapsulate their waste and bury it underground. We don't require them to have insurance in case of a gas spill like Bhopal, for example, which killed how many thousand people.
Oh,
We
yeah,
don't
yeah,
set
that was a big
aside
one.
money for decommissioning or cleanup of these coal burning plants. I mean, nuclear seems to be the Boy Scout of energy. So the real question in my mind is, why is the safest large-scale energy source regarded as the most dangerous by the public?
That is a question that we've been trying to answer. I think there's a lot of theories out there, but I mean, it's it, it's easy to make it sound scary. It really like you're talking about, for one thing, this thing that for uh, thousands and thousands of years we didn't even know was there. You can't see, touch, taste radiation. Um, and so it's really easy to be scared of something like that, that we don't have any natural way uh, to recognize it. I mean, there's a reason why we don't have a natural way of recognizing it, because it's not a threat um, in normal circumstances. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really easy to make it sound scary, especially when you start talking about nuclear weapons. That's probably a big contributor to it, because they're just like you're able to just take such little amounts of material and turn it into such a big destructive force. Um, it that right there is probably a major contributor to the reason why people are so scared of radiation, I would say.
And people are afraid of the risk of countries gaining nuclear weapons if they have nuclear power plants. Is that a reasonable risk? Something things that people should be afraid of?
No.
Proliferation.
Um, so they've done studies on this, and uh, it actually results in the opposite of proliferation, if that makes any sense. When you're using it for peaceful purposes in the studies that they've found when it comes to the correlation. And light water reactors, which is your big main reactors that are out there, like 99% of them out there are your light water reactors. They don't produce weapons usable material, or at least it's not. It makes no sense to try to use those plants to make material, because that's a lot of people's concerns, right? Is that you're going to use these nuclear power plants and you're going to make some weapons material, and then you're going to make a weapon. That is just, it's such a not feasible way to do things. It makes way more sense to try doing it in the enrichment phase, by just continuing to enrich, or making a very specialized reactor that's specifically made to produce plutonium for weapons. And those type of reactors are not your light water reactors, and they're not ideal at all to make electricity with. The ones to make electricity, they use up all this material, that's the fissile material, right? Rather than producing more fissile material. A lot of people are concerned about the fact. I know I might be going a little fast here. Let me know if I'm going all over the place. But
That's
people
good.
are concerned about the fact that nuclear power plants produce plutonium, and that is true. They do produce plutonium, and when you're talking about plants that are specifically designed for plutonium production for weapons, they put the fuel in and they take the fuel out pretty quickly, because you only want it to get a quick irradiation, and you take it out because you don't want to produce there's several flavors of plutonium. I should mention. Plutonium 239 is your weapons grade plutonium, and then plutonium 240. You can stop me if I'm getting too technical. But plutonium 240 is a contaminant that you don't want for weapons material. And if you keep your fuel in the power plant for a really long time, like you would for a power plant rather than a weapons plant, you start building up plutonium 240, and you get to the point where you have so much plutonium 240 in it, it makes it to where it's not technically impossible to try turning that into weapons, but it's really not feasible unless you have you're like a major superpower and you have a lot of technology, and you just wouldn't do it because you already have a lot of technology. You just go the easy route, right? Just go build a bunch of enrichment facilities or something. So it's really not. It makes no sense, really, to try using nuclear power to get weapons. I hope that your listeners will follow what I was kind of trying to say there. If you want weapons, the cat's already out of the bag, and you would go the route you would go is down the go mine uranium, do your enrichment, and just keep enriching it until it's weapons grade. But going the power route, it's not going to lead you to weapons. And which reminds me, in those studies, when typically people don't go nuclear power and then they have weapons. They usually go, or the ones that do have weapons, they usually go weapons first, and then they're like, hey, we have this technology, or we have this ability. Let's go ahead and let's make power.
I see.
So it's not
so weapons are an
usually
entry drug to power, not the other way around.
exactly. Yep.
So okay, so we've talked about proliferation risk. We've talked about Chernobyl, which is the biggest one. We might as well hit Fukushima as well, since that's on everyone's mind. As soon as you mention nuclear power, everyone's going to say, but what about Fukushima? they're still leaking radiation. They're going to release all this radioactive water into the ocean, and we're all going to be glowing.
There's so much to unpack there. Just like there's so much to unpack about Chernobyl. Fukushima actually was my my capstone course in my undergrad. Um, Basically, the entire course was about Fukushima. I wrote 30 or 40 pages on Fukushima, and that it still barely scratched the surface on when it comes to Fukushima and things we've learned and what we know. And I guess some of the main things when it comes to Fukushima is like talking about the harm when it comes to radiation to the population and to the environment. And I already alluded to it. Nobody died from radiation itself. Um, the and then to the environment, looking at the UNSCEAR reports again, the United Nations reports, they find it very unlikely that we will ever find any indications of increased cancer risks, or sorry, we're talking about the environment, uh, any uh, noticeable effects to the environment, basically, to the oceans or to the surrounding area around the facility. So health risks we know from radiation, there were none. And that was a triple meltdown of how many thousand megawatts? It was a lot of thermal power there that melted down, and we still have no health effects from radiation, and that should be like a huge wake up call to people. Like, wait, like, wow, it's no health effects, really? Like a triple meltdown didn't kill anybody or harm anybody, or we could you could do epidemiological studies on these people and you would never see an increase in cancer in them because it's just negligible. That right there, I think, I don't, I guess I don't really hang out with people too much that don't know that, but I don't think a lot of people know that there were no health effects from that. Um,
There were like
and
several people
then
that were killed during the evacuation or died because of the evacuation.
that's what I wanted to get to next. And that's a big thing actually for me in my field when it comes to emergency preparedness for nuclear power plants, that it makes me a little upset because again it's that fear factor around radiation, and the fact that they were so scared of it. You had hospitals basically unplugging people and trying to transport people, and people dying because of that. You don't just all of a sudden uproot a bunch of people from a hospital, right? So a lot of people died because of that, and people in nursing homes. It can be very harmful if you do a hurried uh, evacuation because you're scared. And that's really, I'm glad we're getting to this because I wanted to get this or to this. People, uh, the fear from radiation has killed significantly more people than radiation itself. And I told you kind of at the beginning, I don't know if we were recording yet, but uh, the it, it's kind of our fault when it comes to the nuclear industry and us in the radiation field. We've not done a good job at communicating this, and I actually want to be part of that, or solving that issue is figuring out how to communicate radiation risks and nuclear risks to the public, because uh, not only in nuclear power but even in the medical field, fear of radiation is harmful. Like if you say, I don't want that CT scan after I just had a big fall, and then you turn out dying because they didn't see that internal bleeding or whatever that they could have if they would have done a CT scan, or you have a doctor who decided because us in the radiation field have encouraged them to reduced their doses have decided not to do a CT scan when they probably should have done a CT scan. Um, the fear is very harmful. So that's a big takeaway that I got from Fukushima. I know I'm I'm taking it away from Fukushima, bringing it right back here, but that's a big takeaway we got. I mean, I've talked to lots of people, federal regulators, other people throughout my field, and that's a big thing we learned about it was that a nuclear power accident, it was just the release was not really that major when it comes to health consequences. So I think there was another one I wanted to talk about, but I can't remember. Maybe you have some questions for me on that I haven't answered yet on Fukushima.
Yeah, I mean, why did they evacuate? What was it, a rational decision at the time? Were they uncertain about the plant exploding, or what should they have done?
So I've actually done a lot of I do plume modeling as part of my job, where I can model radioactive plumes coming out of plants, basically nuclear power plants. And in my own models, I've been able to do evacuation could have definitely been warranted. I would say it was warranted from the models that I've done and models that I've seen out there. When it comes to that immediate, like, hey, let's go ahead and move people in a calm, collective way. You don't move your populations that are, what's the word, vulnerable. You don't move your vulnerable populations. At least you don't move them in a very hurried way. But that happened. It should not have. It's actually something, I mean, we train for here in the United States. But a short-term evacuation was definitely, I would say, was called for, and it could have been done in a lot safer way than what was done. When it comes to your long-term evacuations, I guess I should mention to your viewers, my opinions do not represent my employers, but for the long-term relocation, I would say was not warranted, and that actually is supported by evidence and science, that people's being relocated permanently from their homes for several years. We're going on 10 years now. They're about to start. They're starting to move people back significantly, but that has turned out to be much more harmful than the radiation itself. When you move people from their homes, that shortens lifespans. So they should have kept people or brought people back a lot quicker, in my opinion, to their homes.
Indeed, I mean the measured levels from what I've read are below background in other places.
In a lot of places, they have this difficult to return zone, is what they call it. That it is higher. The doses that I've seen that you would get from living in that area are several times background. Trying to remember the exact numbers. In 1 year, you would get, let me think, maybe over 5 times background. But when it comes to health risks, you would not be able to measure it. Like I've mentioned before, those lower doses, even with the population living there, you would not see the health risks from it. You could move people back there today, and
so that's not really a rational decision.
I would say it's not. I just said if you move people back there today, well, you can't move people back there today. There's not any homes for them to move to. It's been overrun by nature at the moment. So nature's nature doesn't care. It's there. They're like, well, it's not harmful to us. We're enjoying our time here. Like, there's been some articles out there on that. Nature's it's moved in,
It's not
just like in
bothered by the
Chernobyl.
radiation.
Not at all.
So I guess the one big thing that we haven't talked about yet is the nuclear waste. Everyone
Mhm.
says that it's amoral to do nuclear power because it creates this waste, and this is a long-term problem for generations, for hundreds of thousands of years. People will be killed by nuclear waste. Tell me, is that a myth? Is that the truth?
So the one big thing that I like to mention when it comes to the so-called waste, it's in my opinion, it's not waste. It's used nuclear fuel, slightly used nuclear fuel. Is uh, the nuclear industry, the nuclear power industry, is required to capture all of its waste, and it's the only industry that does that. Every other industry, their waste that lasts for uh, forever, or at least a long time when it comes to like CO2 and whatnot. It's just put out in the atmosphere. It's coal. It's just particulate pollution. They just let it all out there, and that stuff lasts for a really really long time. A lot of it forever, and other ones for thousands and thousands of years. And but you hear people, they're like, oh, but nuclear waste lasts for so long. Like, but other industries it lasts forever. Like, uh, people don't think about that. Nuclear waste gets better over time. It gets less hazard over time. But people don't seem to think about that. But if other industries were all required to take into account for all of their waste that they generated, we wouldn't have climate change. It wouldn't be a thing. And that right there, I think is just a major thing that us in the nuclear industry need to uh, really tell people is like we wouldn't have climate change if other industries were as responsible as us.
One thing I look at is that, because nuclear is required to pay for its waste storage and its decommissioning, it's really the only
Mhm,
moral source of energy out there, because no
mhm.
other power source is required to take care of its waste. No other power source pays for it up front. And people complain that
Yep.
nuclear is a little bit more expensive than coal or gas. But
Yeah.
coal and gas are really much more expensive if you take account of the impacts of their waste.
Yeah. Yeah. Like exactly. So like nuclear, it's like yeah, it's really you're like you said, a moral, a power source where it's like the perfect package right there. Like you've already up front made it pay for everything. It's decommissioning, it's waste storage. Like uh, you set those things right up front, right from the very beginning, 60 years ago. So, um, but I don't think people see that. They don't make that connection. I've seen people usually when you mention that they'll sidestep and go to some other argument really, um but a lot of people, they just want to dislike it. It doesn't matter if you are able to tear down their argument. But
So this leads us to the interesting part of it. What have we done wrong in communicating the risks? Obviously, repeating the evidence isn't working. I mean, the evidence is out there, and people can find it if they want to, and people are smart enough to do that.
yeah,
What have we done wrong, and what can we do better?
well, I think a big thing is that we even in the nuclear industry, we do treat it as something special. um I mean, the nuclear industry has a lot of their jobs because of the fact that we treat it as something special, and that we put dosimetry on people unnecessarily, even though they're not going to. They get maybe 10 milliram a year, which you get 300 milligram just from natural sources. Like the fact that we are so careful about everything. I mean, it sounds really cool, like, oh yeah, we're so careful about everything, but it really it's a double-edged sword where it makes it seem like something scarier.
Yes.
Um, like another example is just the security around a nuclear power plant. It is the most secure, or nuclear power plants in the United States. They're the most secure locations anywhere in the world, really. Like you might have an easier time getting on the White House lawn than getting into a nuclear power plant.
Hmm.
They have so many like this. I think this is another thing that adds to the cost because we put so many security people there and we make it a fortress, and they have like M16s and they got snipers. It is unbelievably high security, and that right there, like again, cool. Like they really care, but now you've made it seem even scarier because you've given the impression that it's necessary.
Yes.
And everything we do when it comes to trying to make it safer, actually, it's that double-edged sword of like, oh, like it's dangerous. It go like with these new generation of nuclear power plants. Like I geek out on them. I love them, but we keep talking about trying to make them safer. And I hate that word. We're basically trying to paint this. It paints this picture even more for uh, the public that, oh, our current ones are dangerous. No, they weren't. They weren't. They're not at all. So in trying to improve it when it comes to safety and security and all these things, we've really done harm um, to the nuclear industry in doing that, and it's the nuclear industry that's doing it. um, I would say they are probably more responsible for a lot of this cost and everything than the anti-nuclear um, uh, people, really.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. Well,
So they should
and
stop talking about safety and start talking about the benefits.
yeah, yeah, start talking about all the benefits. Like, definitely start talking about the benefits. A lot more than trying to explain your safety. Like I just watched uh, a presentation about Chicago. They're going to get a microreactor. Their university. They're trying to get a microreactor in to supply like 13% of their power with one small microreactor. And like a huge portion of their talk was about safety and how, oh, this is different. It's way safer. You are doing so much harm um,
Yeah,
in,
I
in,
mean,
in, in, in talking like that.
if other radiation risks were treated the same way as nuclear power, you would have, everyone who gets on a plane would have to wear a lead vest. Right? I mean, I go to the dentist and get these
Yeah, it's
little
way more
dental
expensive.
X-rays, and they put lead, and everyone gets lead on, and they're like,
Yeah,
done.
yeah. Everyone wears a TLD. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, people get on
Oh,
airplanes and
yeah.
they have this dose that probably exceeds anything you get at a nuclear power plant. No one's wearing
Yeah,
dosimeters on
yeah,
planes except you.
yeah. Well, hopefully I didn't bring my permanent record dosimeter with me because then I would be recording something that a dose that didn't come from my normal job. Yeah. Uh, yeah. And so a part of me, uh, a little bit of a sidestep here, but a part of me wants all of the other energy industries to kind of come to our same level. And then another part of me, no, because when you do that, you start making everything so much more expensive. You start making energy more expensive, and you don't want to make energy more expensive because that can do a lot of harm to people, disproportionately harms people who don't have the means to pay for it. Um, so that leads you to, okay, so then we just need to make our power cheaper um, and not continue to ratchet up our regulations. But sorry, a little side thing there.
No, that's good. It's definitely an important perspective. I think we need to figure out some way to, and relatively quickly as well, to make this palatable to the public.
Yep.
There's a
Yep.
lot of the wrong. We've been sending the wrong messages. I mean, people aren't worried about, nuclear isotopes in hospitals. People just aren't worried about them because it's for health. But it's the same stuff.
Yep. And the nuclear power plants, those are for health. They really are. Getting that clean air and getting that energy. Like it should be viewed
It's
as
a
that.
good
It is
message.
for the health. Yep. For the health of the people surrounding and for the health of the planet, really. It's the same stuff.
Indeed.
Didn't think about that until just now.
That's a good message. Nuclear power plants are for our health. The only moral energy.
I like that. Yeah. Good message.
Well, I think we're getting close to the end of our time slot here. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell our listeners before we sign out?
I guess if listeners want to continue to follow me, they can. I'm actually starting a new YouTube channel. I already started it. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but it's called The Rad Guy. So now that I've mentioned it on a podcast, I'm going to have a lot more obligation to to really get that up and going. But I really want to get started on my communication, honing my communication skills and getting all this information like we talked in here out to the public.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, I'll definitely keep an eye out for more Rad Guy stuff.
Yeah, I need to. Unfortunately, it's not a completely unique name on YouTube, but
well, thank you, DJ LeClear, for providing your insights on this controversial topic. I think it's extremely important in these challenging times that society take a rational view of its energy sources. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.